Om Brahmanam Yo Vididati Purvam Yo Vaivedamscha Prahinohi Tasmai Tamhadeva Atmabuddhi Prakasha Mumukshurvai Sharnagataham Prapadye. Om Shantihi Shantihi Shantihi. That one, nameless, formless reality, who projected Lord Brahma at the beginning of a cosmic cycle, and who delivered the Vedas unto him, who is the eternal bridge to immortality, who is partless, faultless, actionless, all-pervasive, who resembles fire that has consumed all its fuel. I go for refuge to that one Brahman, whose light turns mankind's understanding to the Atman. Om peace, peace, peace. Om Sahana, Om Sahana Vavatu, Sahana Bhunaktu, Sahaviryam Karvavahai, Tejasvi Navaditamastu, Ma Vidvishavahai. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. May Brahman, divine reality, protect us. May Brahman sustain us. May Brahman illumine our thinking process. May we not find fault with each other, with the world, or with the Dharma teachings. And may what we study be a source of inspiration to us eternally. Om peace, peace, peace. May peace be unto us, and may peace be unto all. Om Hari Om. Today we have gathered for the first class in a series of 3, which will be broadcast over the next 3 Sundays at this particular time. In Hawaii, we take Sunday afternoon to follow an old tradition, is to go to church, as it were, but going to church for the Vedantist doesn't have anything much to do with institutions only, or seeking saviors, or praying for things, or for listening to sermons about morality, but more to do with observing the eternal perfection that exists within each and every one of us. That is, the church is not an outer institution, it's an inner verity inside of each and every being. They have to make their way there in inner life to the kingdom of heaven within, and find the truth for themselves and verify it by their practice. On the way there will be some obstacles that cause suffering. So one will have to do away with that with some effort, self-effort, in order to get into a natural state of being, which the seers call Samadhi. So that's actually a brief introduction to the name of this series, called Suffering, Striving, Samadhi, or if you want it in Sanskrit, Dukkha, sadhana, and samadhi, which there's really no good English word for. Maybe beatific vision or something like that, but that suggests God with form. And as I was just saying, we're not so much looking for saviors necessarily, although you get to the Father through the Son. The Vedantist would agree to that for most people. But there are a whole host of people that have already found their oneness with the Father or with Brahman, as we were just chanting. And they come back free of the fetters of birth and death, even though they're born, and the body goes through transitions like old age, disease, decay, and death. Ignorance is not real, Vedanta says, so it can't cause you any real suffering. So taking the truths first and foremost and putting those up as your background, as your watch guard, as your sentinel, and doing vigil every day around those principles, keeping them first and foremost. Or seek thee first the kingdom of heaven and Father and so forth, if you were to say it in Christian speak, is the daily effort of the sadhaka, or the disciple, or the devotee. Do the devotees have a goal? The question was asked on the drive over here today, as some of us were in a car together, making our way here to the Kedarnath Center in Waimea, Hawaii, out here in the middle of the ocean, 2,600 miles from any land mass, surrounded by Ganga Pacifica, the sacred body of water. So the question was answered by saying that if the devotees have a goal, it's to observe dharmic life. And in order to observe dharmic life, you would have to watch out for one particular thing. And somebody said, Maya, some scars of the mind, karma. I said, but these are devotees we're talking about, not worldly people or acolytes or beginners. If you're a confirmed devotee, then there's another obstacle you have to watch out for, and it's called sattva. So sattva is this attachment to pleasure or to a sort of egotistic or egoistic bliss that occupies the mind, and is sort of a laurel that you can rest upon, fall back upon. And you know that people who are seeking higher goals do not rest on their laurels. So Dharma then would be the goal for the devotee. Make sure that themselves and their children, their friends, their students if they're teachers, make sure that everyone is aware of the Dharma and keeping it current day to day. And that would be the attenuator for the problem of suffering. Because we know that great souls like Lord Buddha, for instance, named it as the first of Four Noble Truths. There is suffering, so it's actually a kind of a noble thing then to affirm that there is suffering. And I hear that you can't be a real Buddhist without it. If people go ahead and enter in, take Buddhist vows and so forth, but somewhere inside of them maybe they don't believe the world is full of suffering. They still believe it might be their oyster, providing them rich pearls and things, or they still believe maybe it's full of happiness. And, well, even people who have attained great wealth, like King Janaka, for instance, who was the subject of our first chart, got tired of his wealth. And King Janaka for these devotees we're talking about, is rather an ideal. See Sri Ramakrishna talking about him quite often in the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna, the most amazing manuscript available to us in modern times. It has everything in it, spiritually speaking, from soup to nuts, is to read the Gospel of Ramakrishna. I have people now writing to me from different points of the globe, and even in prison I got a message the other day saying, please send me the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna. So if you check in there, you'll find Sri Ramakrishna talking about three great beings. Sukadev, he loved Sukadev. And he also loved Narada, who's pictured actually here on this chart, one of these wandering minstrels that walking through the garden of King Janaka, because King Janaka was a king with many beautiful gardens that he'd like to spend time in. And also beings like Janaka. And Janaka drank his milk from a brimming cup, is the quote out of the Gospel by Sri Ramakrishna Paramahamsa. So it means he had everything. He had the world, he had wealth, he had riches, he had everything he could possibly want, and he had spirituality as well. So when people read the Gospel, they say, I want to be like Janaka. That's my ideal. So for the devotees, that would be a great ideal, because Janaka also had a deep and vast reservoir of dharmic awareness in him. And So when you see a person like that amidst the world and everything, enjoying things sattvically, then say that even these beings come across that odd appearance of what's called world weariness, that their wealth and their riches and all their opulence and everything not only doesn't please them and make them happy, but can also all of a sudden act as an impediment to peace and contentment. So that's why I say suffering, first noble truth and so forth, is called noble, to acknowledge that everything is full of suffering. Now we had a version of that week before last, when we did our last class on the subject of Tibetan Buddhism and Advaita Vedanta, where we studied the Mahamudra to find out everything was empty. So it's a good first step in sadhana, is to make a move towards knowing that everything's empty of substance, empty of the ability to fulfill you, even empty as a Mayic appearance. As you were to take apart a solid object, you'd see that its consistency was changing particles. Shifting sand would be a good way of saying that, too. So if you find out it's empty, then the first thing is to draw back in some sort of aversion. And of course, the Father of Yoga has told us attachment and aversion both are two great problems. So you're kind of caught between a rock and a hard place there, in a sort of Mayic vice, when you can neither attach to something nor be averse to it. So you'll have to find some sort of medium ground, particularly if you're a devotee. Now, if you're a monk or an ascetic, mendicant, a sannyasin and so forth, then it's a bit easier just to give it all up and wander away. And even the aversion to it goes away after a while. It just looks like all Brahman to you. So that's a beautiful way. We also saw that 2 weeks ago in that chart on Advaita Vedanta, in Gaudapada's teaching of Asparsha Yoga and so forth, the non-touch yoga. You don't touch anything simply because it really can't be touched. To actually touch it is inviting suffering, and to touch it not because it may bring you suffering is also a problem, because fear is there. So all of these teachings begin to contrast against each other so much that you become aware of the dvandva mohena, the contrastic pairs of opposites. Then you find out that if your consciousness rises a little higher and more refined, dvandva mohena goes away, and it's not a problem of attachment and aversion anymore. It's a solution of abiding with everything as Brahman. So that's a very strange and subtle passageway, a medium point, a yoga, a balance, an equanimity that very few beings are able to reach and hold. Sometimes you can reach it, but then there are problems there at that level of merely perceiving it. And then the next would be to have it as your very own. See, Priya, Moda, and Pramoda, that's called in one of the teachings in our Priya is you see something very dear, and Moda is you want to have it for your own, and Pramoda is getting it and keeping it. So that teaching can apply to a lot of levels of things with their various lessons. See something very dear like a carpet or furniture or something, you want it, you go get it, you have it, and then pretty soon it's not so dear to you anymore, or it doesn't catch your attention anymore. So this was the predicament of beings with both spirituality and great wealth. You see, King Janaka had immense wealth, palaces and lands and so forth. So he's a good example to begin our study of this class series called Suffering, Striving, and Samadhi. Now, striving here, as the question was already asked about it, means sadhana. In Sanskrit we're saying striving that has some positive benefit to it, because there are people who are striving on all levels of their being for different things and for different goals and for different ideals. And right orientation, remember, also goes with this problem of the First Noble Truth. There is suffering. Why is there suffering? Maybe because you're seeking things with the wrong orientation. If you want to bring the Fourth Truth back and subject it to the declaration of the First Noble Truth. Ashtangika Marga is an eightfold path. And it looks a lot like sometimes we put that side by side with Ashtangika Yoga or Ashtanga Yoga. That is the eight-limbed yoga. Buddha and Patanjali were probably only about 600 years apart, which is not very long in terms of Indian philosophy and reincarnation and so forth. So you see these two eight systems put side by side, and you see so many similarities. There's right there should be, because Buddhism is just an Indian darshana, and it's had the great success of spreading itself out over the rest of the world and making itself amenable to all the different cultures that it encountered, with its wonderful breadth and depth and its nonviolent attitude, ahimsa, which goes right hand in hand with Jainism and Hinduism. So we find that sadhana then is the word that describes best this word striving in English, because you can be striving with wrong orientation, and then you attain things with wrong orientation, and you begin to get suffering coming back instead of satisfaction. There's actually a talk my teacher used to give, Swami Asheshanandaji Maharaj, peace and bliss be upon him. He used to give it once a year. He'd call it "Satiation Never Comes." So he thinks that satisfaction is a kind of a pipe dream. So other words in English might describe this better. Some like contentment. Maybe beyond contentment would be peace of mind, and beyond peace of mind would be the peace that passeth all understanding. So we have to look for certain English words and their connotations to find out the deeper meaning of some of these teachings in Dharma. So I just said that we're not here just to listen to sermons about morality, because most of us that have come, if not all of us, have come to great systems like Buddhism and Vedanta, have long ago become moral and found out that morality had its limitations too. We decided to go for some deeper teachings like Buddhism and Vedanta and so forth, the Dharma in other words. So to give out the Dharmic teachings is to help inspire minds, to get rid of their sleepiness and to get rid of their ignorance and to get rid of their suffering. And if you have a real thirst and taste for it, then it shouldn't be a difficult proposition to interest yourself in it, because it's unique among all the so-called solutions of the world. So with that said, you can see this chart that we want to start off with. I have several charts that play off of it that we'll spend the first half today looking at, and it will be engaging enough for all of those who are, as I'm saying, very interested in this subject. So you see there, for instance, the four series that of mental positions or postures, because I'm going to look at that later today or next week, that Janaka went through. Janaki is Sita, of course, Krishna's Ram's beloved, but King Janaka went through these four different levels of mind, caused by something which I will share with you in a minute. First was melodies of mourning. We're putting this all into musical theme. This is his song of victory. So first he had to sing a few melodies of mourning. Secondly, you can see down by the bass clef there, that's the bass clef that's there in your music. It's the bottom of if you're reading piano, the top is treble and the bottom is bass. And so you'll know that that's called a musical clef. And so that's improvisational airs on awakening. So he's now entertaining his mind with a way of awakening. So how can I get this mind to quit mourning, quit being depressed, quit falling into tamas, quit being restless, and reach a balance like a sattva? And then again guard against sattva as being the final destination, which is a unique teaching in Hinduism. The gunas, the three gunas, peculiar and particular to Vedanta. You don't find it anywhere else. It's very powerful. Triputi. The third encounter there he had with his mind was variations on a theme of victory. So he begins to experience success with his mind, because one of the unique things about King Janaka's story, which I'm going to read a little bit of it for you in Yoga Vashishta, is that this is one, as you read all this, some questions might come up. Well, King Janaka was this great king. He had everything. He drank his milk from a brimming cup. He had dharma, all this. So why is he suffering? So you could either say this is a lesson to others to see somebody living in opulence who suffers all the weights of luxury and riches, and at the same time finds a way out of it. Or you could say that, this was maybe in a lifetime that happened before he became fully illumined. And either one of those explanations could suffice. However, the most marvelous thing about King Janaka's story that I believe is that he did this all by himself. He found the source of his suffering. He went into his mind, he scolded his mind, and then he got his mind on his side, and then his mind became pure mind, and he got into Samadhi, and he did it all without a teacher. Not that he didn't have teachers in the past lifetimes, we're not saying that. It's that this is a soul that was ripe and ready for realization. And all he needed was a little impetus. Let's see what his impetus was. Remember now, as we read this, his favorite pastime is to go into his most wonderful garden. He loved to go into his garden and walk through and see all the sights and smell the smells and everything. And I'm giving it away early, so let me read it to you so we can understand it. So a few paragraphs only, because I don't like to read live streaming on the air for a long time. But remember, this story is told by Lord Vashishta to the young teenage Ram, who is not yet aware that he's the avatar of the age, Ramchandra. And so he's got a problem with suffering, Sri Ram, because he went on pilgrimage, just like Buddha was to do a few thousand years later, and saw suffering and came back a different soul. He was all joyous when he left King's palace, King Dasaratha's palace, and the Koshala kingdom, and he came back after he saw suffering outside because he had never seen suffering, just exactly like Buddha went out with his father, King Sakya, and in a carriage outside the castle there to the households and streets and so forth, and saw people suffering. He saw the four great signs, if you remember, like an old man and a dying man and burning corpse and things like that. So he became really sobered by that. So this same thing is being told to Sri Ram, who's going through the same thing thousands of years later with his teacher, Lord Vashishta, teaching him. That's the setup here. So here he is telling Ram about King Janaka in order to bring across some teachings about wealth and so forth. Not only having wealth, but holding wealth. Not only having and holding wealth, but giving it up and taking it on again if you had to. Becoming attached and detached at will, as my teacher used to say. So, in the land called Videha, there once lived a king named Janaka, who was kind and just, observant of Dharma, and generous to his subjects. He was also free of any fear, and had never known any such condition, being always happy with what he had. And he had plenty, more than other persons, even a king, could ever want. Other kings could not boast of such abundance and such power. Yet Janaka remained unruffled by all this, and lived in quiet joy all the while. And it was one of the king's subtle joys to visit his fragrant and beautiful garden near the palace daily, where he strolled casually, enjoying the sights and scents immensely. At these times, all the courtiers and subjects remained outside the garden walls, allowing the king his favorite pastime undisturbed, in peace and quiet. Of course, in those days, as was the custom of many rulers, the king always allowed wandering sadhus and siddhas to frequent his garden, unimpeded by the guards. For theirs was a simple life, free of ostentation, and they never stayed long in one place. Their presence was also considered a blessing on the land. For they only contemplated God and otherwise spent their time talking about spiritual life and truth. On one particular occasion, the king's mind was particularly focused, and instead of losing himself as usual in the vision of the many forms of plant life, colored flowers, wonderful scents, wondrous sounds that proceeded from the lush jungle-like area, he started to notice the songs of the siddhas, sung with such devotion and yearning to God. Strangely, never before, though he had walked his garden often, had he been so tuned in to the message of these songs. As he walked past one sadhu, who was obviously lost in deep communion with his beloved, he heard the refrain, quote, "The highest state of consciousness becomes known to that one, in whom knowledge and knower become one. Thus, O my mind, contemplate your own inner wisdom unceasingly and reach the highest goal." This was a song that was being sung. Further down the path, the king heard another sadhu singing, quote, "When the difference between the seer and what is seen has been duly analyzed, and the right and proper conclusion is drawn, the light of Brahman is directly perceived. It is that the wise sages meditate upon." Unquote. Still deeper in the garden, as if he had never seen it before, Janaka heard another song that set his hair on end, subtly sensitized as he was at this moment in time. Quote, "What the human being calls me, the illumined soul knows as non-different from the primal I. All manifestations in the universe point to the subtle presence of this eternal principle, whose radiance is the emanation of Atmagyan, off of the ocean of Brahman." Unquote. As Janaka wandered through his garden, seeing and hearing as he had never had before, he came upon siddha after siddha, sadhu after sadhu, and all seemed to be enwrapped in inner communion, characteristic of their specific calling. One sang, quote, "Your Lord, the Self, dwells within. Why do you persist in looking outside?" Another sang, "Your worldly knowledge is merely eternal, and as such is helpless to confer upon you any real benefit. Give up useless thoughts and things, and take up due meditation on Atmagyan, which is like the Kaustuba gem shining translucently amidst mere conch shells." Unquote. Though all these spiritual sentiments were offered in a soothing manner and called forth divine love and longing in the hearts and minds of those who heard them, they produced a sort of panic in the mind of King Janaka, for they conveyed to him the thought that he had been undergoing a regimen of futile occupation all his life and wasting precious time. Thus he was overcome by a frantic feeling. Departing the precincts swiftly, he made his way back to the castle as quickly as he could, leaving aside every minister, well-wisher, and servant, entered into a private study, locked the door from inside, leaving strict orders that he was not to be disturbed. Settling himself into an appropriate position, King Janaka, of intelligent temperament, began to reflect seriously on what he had just heard contained in the sobering yet ecstatic songs of the siddhas and seers in his temple garden. The message they conveyed was simultaneously inviting and alienating, and seemed at once both poisonous and nectar-like to his freshly stunned mind. Strangely attracted, yet painfully averse, the king forced himself to quiet the mind so as to get a grasp on the essentials of what he had just heard. After due cognition, he took a deep breath, addressed his mind as follows. To be continued next week. We will continue it in a condensed form here on this chart. So I've laid the foundation for you now of how King Janaka had gone to his pleasure garden as usual. But this time, although the seers and the sadhus and siddhas had all been there before, singing and contemplating, King Janaka's mind was in a different state, and he began to pick up on the actual melodies that were, and the meanings of the words, the lines, the lyrics, and so forth, rather than just the kind of overall sensate atmosphere that surrounded him. You could say a difference between sattva, pleasure, happiness, strolling in the pleasure gardens, and then all of a sudden understanding the meaning of every flower, of every leaf, of every word, and of the presence of the great seers and siddhas that were there, the sadhus that were practicing suffering, sadhana, or striving, leading to samadhi. So all of these beings had a very deep longing to become engrossed, and they were using this time in the pleasure garden much differently than King Janaka had. They were using it just for a few days to do their sadhana. He had been there for years, wandering through it. So he had this kind of panic came upon him, and he thought, I'm wasting my time here. It's interesting that an illumined soul can waste her time, but I remember Sri Sharda Devi, Holy Mother, once made a very interesting statement. She said, even the Jivan Muktas are just rotting away in the body. Jivan Mukta is a living, liberated soul. So she means to say that any soul caught in a body is subject to decay, and subject to gunas, and subject to karmas, and subject to suffering that comes from any quarter at any time, even subject to happiness, which is a kind of suffering. So all of these things come back on the soul if they're in an embodied state. Embodiment means name and form means maya. Or the word here being used by Janaka is samsara. You see? And this forms part of his song of mourning. So let's look at his melodies of mourning. So if I were to read on in this story of Lord Vasishta, you can pick a copy of this up through SRV Associations. It's my own version of some condensed Yoga Vasishta that applies to the wonderful Brigu and also Laghu versions of Yoga Vasishta, which are very, very long, too long to put into English, some of them. So a condensed version or two has been put out by Ramakrishna Order and by a few other orders too. So it's a very wonderful read, Yoga Vasishta. Kind of has a cult following even in the West, a cult following. And people take Lord Vasishta as a very unique soul. Of course, he was one of the mind-born children of Lord Brahma, and in that lifetime was the head priest of King Dasaratha's court, which is how he began to teach the young avatar Sri Rama and awaken him to his higher destiny. So if I were to keep reading in that story, you'd see how these four levels of King Janaka's mind started to hurt, and you might say a kind of evolution towards freedom. So he has these melodies of mourning. First of all, afflicted with pain, deluded by the world of Maya. All of a sudden he gets some sobering awakening, seeing people seeking. He feels like he's treading water, that even how much pleasure and wealth and everything there is, that it can't satisfy him. So he becomes keenly aware of that, acutely aware of it, and more than ever before. So his balance and his yogic equanimity gets ruffled, as if he now has to enter into a new level of sadhana that will put him beyond any suggestion of duality, or this and that, pleasure and pain, life and death, and so forth. He's getting a keen little taste of that. That's the first melody of mourning you'll see coming along in this story. The second is brooding on the short span of life in the illusion of time. So that's why I put up this chart. Let's switch to it real quick. I'll give a shortened version of that. It's called the Curtain of Nescience. You see there, its main teaching is cited by Lord Shiva's words here. He says, the luminaries have determined that the curtain of nations consists of fear, doubt, and ignorance, and is maintained and thickened due to the mind's brooding on the effects of these primal causes. So this is the problem with brooding. It's exacerbating any particular problem that you have coming forward in your mind. So that's why fear, doubt, and ignorance have been noted in this sense as being three of the, you might call them kleshas or antaryayas, like kleshas or antaryayas in yoga, kinds of obstacles that the great seers have cited that occupy people's minds. And so this is a very general cross-section, sort of a triputi of suffering of its own. And so not content just to state it and say, oh, don't be fearful, quit doubting, please do something about your ignorance. Lord Shiva is saying here, it's actually part of a curtain of nescience that covers the mind. And it covers the mind of even the ancestors, and it covers the minds of the gods and goddesses and the celestials. It finds its way through the whole individual and collective mind inward into the kings of heaven, and it causes beings to blot out their true nature. They're not able to see Brahman. They're instead in constant play in the fields of the Lord. And sometimes not even knowing that the play is unreal and the player is real. They say it's like it's kind of dreaming, so they say the dreamer is real, the dream is not, so wake up from the dream. So this curtain of nescience is greatly responsible for all of that, and it's no one's fault. It's one of the properties of Maya. The only fault that the soul would have is permitting it to influence its dharmic life instead of staying aloof from it and free of it. So that even if one did reincarnate, one could be born as a Jivan Mukta like Lord Janaka. So in a Jivan Mukta's life at any time, say in great souls like Shankara's life and others, they can all of a sudden have this fresh view of Maya, or the ocean of suffering. If you're to catch a glimpse of the ocean of suffering, it would be very difficult for you not to be very depressed. Your depression would be in correlation with how much you see the world to be real. If you still haven't given up the worlds of name and form, and you still have a strong belief that they're real or have some sort of sense of reality, then when you saw the ocean of suffering, your suffering would be great. You'd be very depressed. But if you're absolutely assured and have seen yourself that the ocean of suffering is not ultimately real, and that there are hundreds and thousands of souls who have transcended it and gotten into a state of Samadhi or gained victory over it, then you would not be so depressed when you saw the ocean of suffering. Your depression would be replaced by compassion. So this is where the default zone of compassion falls on the sensitive soul. So Lord Vashishta himself has a quote. Lord Vashishta teaching Sri Ram about Janaka and his song of victory. There's a quote here that applies. When mentation with all its facets and emanations is engaged in, devoid of full awareness, stripped of the knowledge of the self within, then the universe in space and time rises out of nescience, root ignorance. But if the true nature of all things is known prior to embodiment in the three worlds, the entire affair becomes nothing other than Brahman. So a nice, very subtle way in which Lord Vashishta would draw a stark distinction between the fact that if you get into life without your full awareness, with any delusion in your mind, that can come to no good. You can begin to suffer, and your lifetimes can go on in ignorance, with fear, doubt, and ignorance as their components. But that very same life that the soul enters into, if it's entered into with freedom, as he's saying here, knowing the true nature of all things, And if this is known even prior to embodiment, then that very life of suffering, magically as it were, turns to Brahman, right in front of your face, right in front of your eyes. You live in Brahman rather than in the ocean of suffering. So Vishishta draws a nice distinction there. Now see quickly on this chart, we're using it as a comparison to this second point, or is it brooding? Yeah, brooding on the short span of life in the illusion of time. So brooding here is seen as a thickening of the curtain of nescience. So as far as fear goes, because fear is in the upper left-hand corner, fear of death, fear of formlessness, fear of suffering, and fear of other entities. So if you brood on these four kinds of fear, then it tends to thicken the curtain of nescience, and your fear becomes real. You've probably seen people that are full of fear. Maybe even it's veiled and they say, I don't fear, but when it comes down to these tests of their soul, then the fear comes forward in no uncertain terms. I'm going through these quickly. There you see doubt is the next element of the curtain of nescience. All of this is like an opaque curtain that just falls over the individual and collective mind. And you see here a picture of Sri Devi. If you can see through the curtain of nescience, you can see the Divine Mother behind it. She gets veiled too by the curtain of nescience. And these three things are responsible. Fear, doubt, and ignorance are responsible for the curtain of nescience being there. And the curtain of nescience becomes thicker when you brood on fear, doubt, and ignorance. And in opposite fashion, it also becomes thinner when you stop brooding on them. So your energy that you're putting into your sadhana, like Dharma drops in a bucket, Lord Buddha said, is helping you thin that curtain of nescience. So if you keep that going day by day in your striving, suffering, striving, samadhi we're calling this class, then that striving tends to have an effect of thinning the curtain of nescience, and you're having more sattva, you're having more peace, you're having more contentment, you're having more understanding of the Dharma day to day. If you keep that up long enough, then you can establish yourself in yoga. And you keep it up even longer than that, you can never fall out of yoga again. Because when you have fallen out of yoga is when you experience fear, doubt, and ignorance. Keeping yourself in yoga, remember yoga means union. Union with what? With divine reality, call it Brahman, or pure conscious awareness, or timeless, deathless consciousness, or Buddha nature, or Atman, or Paramatman, or Purusha, or any other name you'd want to use that the seers of India have given you. As I had somebody write me today and say, can you send me the teachings on the 6 proofs of the Purusha? So I sent him that. See? So people are out there thinking about this divine reality, and, how to bring it forward from behind what? The curtain of nescience. So the curtain of nescience is just like a fog hanging on a beautiful day, but it's all mental. Physically, the outer representation would be you looking out here in the beautiful hills here of Waimea, with the volcano in the distance and the ocean further behind that. And there's a big fog that just comes in. So the fog isn't really real, it's temporary, it veils, it doesn't change the landscape, it doesn't change the ocean, it doesn't change the sun, it just veils. Sounds to me like Avarana Shakti, you see, or Vikshepa Shakti, how it veils and distorts things. So you're to think that if you had the wherewithal, you would do away with that fog bank in your mind every day by making the sunshine of wisdom what Vishishta is telling Ram about, and what will eventually be brought out here in his Song of Victory, Atmagyan. Concentrate on your Atmagyan, on the inner wisdom within, and that will immediately disperse that fog bank of fear, ignorance, and doubt. What you don't want to do is concentrate and brood on it. So there's a difference, say, between Eastern and Western psychology in that way. Western psychology wants you to think about it and cut it up and chop it up and look at it and hear about it and maybe get a pill for it. And there are various inferior ways in which it's dealt with that maybe bring about occasionally some temporary solutions, but never get you above and beyond it. Yoga psychology is different, and it wants you to water the flowers, not the weeds. So you begin using the power within you to thin these veils of ignorance, and you don't concentrate on them as if they were real, because they're not. It's much the same as resist not evil teaching. Evil's not real, but if you concentrate on it as if it is, then all of a sudden it throws up some very real manifestations in your life, like a red-faced horned devil with a pitchfork coming at you. So, if that's imagined by billions of people, then all of a sudden it becomes very real to billions of people. It's ultimately not real, of course. So you're using not the power of negativity, you face off with the power of negativity, and you take this Atmagyan, this wisdom you have within you, and like a sun, Atmagyan, you put it on that curtain of nations and thin it, and you keep it thin day after day of your life until it becomes a habit. Because the habit you had before was brooding. The habit you're replacing it with now is dispersing. I and my Father are one. Tattvamasi, that thou art, that reality you are. See, Pragyanam Brahman, I am pure Atmagyan, pure wisdom. Aham Brahmasmi, I am Brahman. I am that reality. These are ennobling thoughts of truth with a capital T that will immediately disperse that are winds that will immediately disperse this cloud of nations forming inside of you. So it's positive mind, yes, and positive vrittis, positive thoughts, yes, but it has the added impetus behind it of declaring the non-dual truth, which we studied so nicely over the last 3 weeks, a week ago, in Tibetan Buddhism, Mahamudra, and in Advaita Vedanta by Gaudapada. So we had teachings on fear. What do people doubt? They doubt emptiness, the emptiness of form. They think form is real. So they're not into emptiness. So with every breath they're saying, that object is real and can give me pleasure. That object is real and can give me pain. That particular situation is real and I have to watch out for it. That particular situation is real and I want it. So every breath and every thought, they're ascertaining and certifying form is, form is, form is, form is. And they never entertain the thought of formlessness. They never get free of form. They never think about emptiness or formlessness. They can't hold on to it. Even though in deep sleep tonight they'll hold on to it for hours. And it'll be very, very peace-giving and very, very balance-creating. You come out of it, you'll feel good until you start dreaming away again in your waking and dreaming states. So they also doubt the presence of Maya. Everyone looks upon the world as if it's real. Nobody sees the world-bewitching Maya, which is hiding in everything. Hiding behind the world-bewitching Maya, there's another thing that's hidden, Divine Mother, who is Mahamaya, and hiding behind her is the non-dual Brahman. So you have to, the curtain of nations veils each of these things. See, it veils emptiness by producing form. It veils Divine Mother by producing doubt and ignorance and fear, and it veils Brahman completely by all of those tendencies towards veiling. Avarana. Obscuration. Obscuring thoughts. We'll look at that when we look at the postures of the mind, if not this week, next week. They also doubt the purpose of life. They also doubt formlessness. and they also, of course, doubt divine reality. If the doubt of divine reality overtakes them, then there's no reason to live anymore except pleasure, objects, power, wealth, the very things that Janaki's in full possession of in spades. So where are they going to go when melodies of mourning attack them? All right, I said I was going through it quick. The third ingredient of the curtain of nescience, sometimes also referred to as the cloud of unknowing, is called ignorance. Ignorance of what? Of revealed scriptures and the guru who teaches them. It's not very often we encounter that in the Western tradition, in the Western culture. Started to encounter it more in the 50s, 60s, and so forth, when some of these great teachers of Vedanta, and even before that, in 1893, when Vivekananda came west and brought us the Dharma, he was the first on the scene. After that, then some Buddhist teachers and some other yogis and so forth started coming. Some of them realized, some of them not, and an admixture of all of the above. So as we encountered it all, we found out amidst a few of them, and that's why you would read a book like Yoga Vashishta, because he avers that the very first stage, one or two stages of 8 would be, you have to know the difference between, that's viveka or aviveka. You have to know the difference between real scriptures and mixed or inferior scriptures. Inferior scriptures are talking about everything but your relationship with God. Superior scriptures are talking about your relationship with divine reality in no uncertain terms. It can start with I and my Father are two, but it will always end with I and my Father are one. Like Vivekananda saying, I'm the vine, you're the branches. And that's dualism. And then and then of course then you have the ultimate realization of that is I and my Father are one is where the branches realize, the vines realize they are one with the branch, like that. So he has a way of explaining that in Christianity or in Christian speak that goes through the 3 levels of philosophy. All this in regard to this ideal of revealed scriptures. You'll know the difference between the revealed teachers and the revealed scriptures in that way. The second thing is of dharmic and divine life. They're ignorant of that. So they might be aware of morality, they might be aware of living a good life, sattvic life, pure life, for the sake of life itself, but they're not aware of improving their status so that they can get from worldly life to earthly life, from earthly life to dharmic life, from divine life to divine life, or what was called eternal life. They're also ignorant of spiritual discrimination. That's a big addition to one's spiritual fruits, if they can all of a sudden implement viveka, which is why Swami Vivekananda named him that before he came west, named himself that, because he knew that we really needed to get a hold of the difference between the real and the unreal, between the essential and the non-essential, and between the apparent and the non-apparent, and so forth. We need to have this discrimination, or viveka, first and foremost, and it wasn't going to do just to get into some physical postures or dance and sing the names of the Lord. That would only go so far. That we really needed to have the mind under our control, and the controlling rod of the mind would be viveka, or discrimination between the real and the unreal, knowing for certain. So that spiritual discrimination, people have, they're ignorant of it, many of them. They're also ignorant that they've lived a series of births. That would be an essential teaching of a relative nature, no doubt, admittedly, but nevertheless very helpful in knowing that the soul is undergoing a certain gradual spiritual evolution called krama mukti. It is going from place to place. Like if I were an inchworm, my soul were an inchworm, and I'm crawling along a branch, and then I'm feeling out here, you see, my life is over. I'm starting to feel for a next life, then I all of a sudden find a purchase place, you see. I find a purchase place on there, and then I won't let go of this old body until I get this new body, my new parents, and my new life, in accordance with my karma and in accordance with my evolution. So all of that evolution idea and coming and going and moving is all nonsense from the standpoint of absolute reality, because we just chanted at the beginning of this class that Brahman is partless, faultless, actionless, and all-pervasive, out of the Svetasvatara Upanishad. So actionless means it doesn't really move at all, but the soul is under the idea that it's moving from place to place. So if it becomes aware of the fact that this movement is called reincarnation, and it can begin to trace its last birth, its next birth, its present birth to its last birth, and then maybe even see that it could have another birth in the future, then it's a connection that's very beneficial for its rumination, like what you'll come across that in these melodies of morning and these improvisational airs that he's going through. Finally, they're not aware of the non-dual truth and of the Atman within them. A lot of them are being told that they're sinners or that they're imperfect and that they're going to hell and various misfiances like that, which are all just dreams in the mind. But the dreamless Atman they're not ever told about. See, and the non-dual truth that's beyond even Dharma, it's never explained to them by their parents, particularly in our country. So all of these things are a nice way of saying there's a substratum of ignorance that is a cloud inside of the cloud of nescience itself, and another one called doubt and another one called fear. The point of the teaching being is that you need to take your mind away from brooding on these things. It's like the gunas. If you put your energy into it, then it's going to grow as if real. If you take your energy from it, like not watering the weeds, those will tend to die out. So it's a very simple teaching, but it's a very high practice. And it's one that people can start to engage in, as King Janaka will be doing here, in order to release that fear that is in his mind. He all of a sudden had seized with this kind of fear, this kind of panic. So you can see that curtain of nescience, he's aware of a portion of it. It's just stepped forward in his own mind in regard to this most precious thing, which is not his gardens, but which is God realization. There's another quote from Lord Vashishta down here. It's inside the story. As Ram listened carefully, Lord Vashishta spoke of Udalaka's piercing of the curtain of nescience. That's one of the stories in Lord Vashishta's Yoga Vashishta. It's called Story of Udalaka and how he got through the curtain of nescience. So Vashishta says, mere wisps of thoughts occurred to his mind, that he dissolved them on the spot. When the subtle tendency towards vikalpa, which is projection of mind with desire, arose, he quelled that immediately. Soon even the darkness that gathered, indicative of primal ignorance, was overcome by his non-dual mental stance. And he came upon and beheld a great light. So these three things are described by Lord Vashishta. When Udalaka was doing his sadhana, he saw the curtain of nescience and pierced through all three of these and saw a great light. Interesting, though, that that's not the end of the whole thing, as it might be told in other traditions. Amazed, he pierced through it as well, with the dizziness that came from gazing upon it. So the light itself made him kind of dizzy. It was too brilliant. Thus, the stage of darkness and light was transcended. So he got beyond both the idea of Brahman being a great light or Brahman there being darkness, you see. And he transcended darkness and light too, which is a very subtle duality to go beyond. So he had then the experience inside of himself like Christ coming out of the wilderness and saying, I am the light of the worlds. See, so that light was the transcendent light beyond dualities and beyond the experience of light and darkness in the mind. I think we covered everything. Of course, all of this was set in these three states: waking, dreaming, and deep sleep. Waking, dreaming, and deep sleep. And Om, which is beyond the three states, called Turiya. So a curtain of nescience is found there inside, and one takes stock of the fact that it's formed of these three things: fear, doubt, and ignorance. We're lucky Lord Shiva left this teaching behind, because it's very, very esoteric, hardly ever mentioned. You'll find it in an ancient scripture like Yoga Vishishta, and you'll have to find its reference in the Tantras with Lord Shiva. And it's not been something that's been introduced very much over the millennia that it's been in existence. So it's a good way of looking at the ignorance of the mind, or the cloud of the mind, that we have a hard time getting over. So therefore, let's wend our way back to there. We took a nice little side trip there, and it was all based on this second melody of morning, rooting on the short span of life in the illusion of time. The third melody of morning is despondent, that is, Janaka is despondent due to the desires of the gross mind in ignorance. So desire comes in, and I had thought that we would get into a couple charts on desire, but I wanted to move along in this chart and show just certain facets of teachings that have to do with these melodies of morning that he's working his way through. The fourth one is kingdom and rulership seem empty, dull, and evanescent. And rulers and their vast wealth have only disappeared over time. So, of course, he's one of these rulers with some of this vast wealth. So his mind is beginning to take his own station, a king, to task, and look at it from the standpoint of ultimate freedom, you might say. On the other column, as we'll leave this last one here till the end, on the other column, the gods in the heavens will vanish like fish in the ocean. So now he's thinking back on the teachings that he's gotten from his own Brahmin priests, like Vashishta and others. Think that he's looking at the whole mind-only school, which we studied over the last few months several times, looking at everything, all the worlds exist in the mind, right? That's the perspective of India. And so all of these gods and goddesses are in those worlds with their various votaries and various lokas and akashas and so forth. And he said all of them will just dry up like an ocean at the end of time, at the end of a cosmic cycle. When Shiva withdraws everything back in, like an ocean being evaporated by the close proximity of the sun, all the creatures in the ocean will just flop about on the ocean floor, dry up and die. So he's comparing that phenomena to the gods and goddesses doing the same at the end of a cycle of time, a Mahayuga it's called, Pralaya in Mahayuga. So this is one way in which he's showing his mind that his menial little kingdom there on earth, with all of its lands and all of its wealth, compared to what the gods and goddesses preside over, lord over, reign over inside, is insignificant. This is much vaster inside, and even those kingdoms will go away. So he's beginning to reason with his mind in a way that belittles and takes the well, yes, it takes some of the sting out of it, but it also takes some of the presumptions of the world, of ownership of the worlds and so forth, out of the quotient. So it makes it a lot easier for him to proceed on to higher melodies. We'll see that. Next one is death occurs or recurs, and the timeless Brahman is never quite realized. Finally, the deluded mind thrives as the basic root of the tree of samsara. And so that's where we went on to this chart, which just got colorized. It's called the tree of samsara. So let's look at the tree of samsara, as according to a more recent Indian seer, the great Acharya Shankara. So from Sloka 145 in the famous Viveka Chudamani, there's that word again, Viveka, discrimination between what's essential and what's non-essential, or what's real and what's not real. We take this teaching using this tree of samsara, and we see how it has been set up according to the words of Shankara, which are this: taking this world as the tree, the seed of this tree is tamas, that's depression. The idea of the self as the body is the root, that's ignorance. Attachment is the twig, and actions the soil and water. The pranic life forces are the trunk. So right there you have a list of 3 or 4 things that are essential to the Vedanta philosophy: the gunas, the senses, the objects, and the 5 forms of prana that ebb and flow inside of the human soul. He goes on across the tree there. The different senses are the various branches. The objects of the senses are the flowers. Pain is the fruit. The human soul is the bird that lives on this tree and eats the fruits of suffering born of multifarious activities, karma. So you see in just one sloka, Shankara pretty much outlines in more modern Vedantic terms all of these problems that beset the soul who takes birth in name and form, in time and space, in this world of cause and effect. So you can see up there the various assignments: attachment, the twigs; pain, the fruit; objects are the tree's flowers; the senses are its branches; and human soul is the bird sitting in that tree, suffering these various things. And we should say suffering and enjoying these various things. It's much like the song, but probably Janaki's aware of in his tradition, where we sing Mono chalo nija niketane, Mono chalo nija niketane, Shamshara videshe videshe Brahmo keno karane, Mono chalo nija viketane. So he sings Shamshara Videshe. See, samsara is what it's just this word we've just come upon in this chart, where Janaki is complaining about that. The deluded mind thrives as the basic root of the tree of samsara. It thinks it's the body, and it suffers its misconception as being a physical entity. Instead of knowing itself to be a spiritual verity, it's suffering the misconception that it's a physical entity. And so that's lack of discrimination, it's darkness, it's misorientation, it's the curtain of nescience with ignorance that's causing doubt and fear. It's all these things that we've just cited in the other melodies of mourning, and exacerbated by the fact that comes a time when you have to brood upon them. Now, most people take their brooding over a lifetime. They'll brood the entire time about wealth and its loss, jobs and their loss, children and spouses and their loss and gain. They'll spread out their brooding over a whole lifetime. Janaki, as a Jivan Mukta, So he's coming to a place where all of a sudden he's taking his brooding and putting it all down into 1 or 2 hours, or maybe a couple days, we're not certain. So he went into his chamber, shut the door, said, "Don't disturb me," and he sat down and he started talking to his mind. If I could read it out of the scripture to you, I hope you'll do that yourself. Then you'll see exactly how Janaka takes his mind to task. "Oh mind, what are you doing? Why are you thinking this way?" He actually treats his mind as a friend, or at this point, a complacent enemy that he's trying to talk into higher reasoning. He's trying to reason with it. So it's very characteristic of Indian songs and Indian teachings that people know that they're not the body, but the thing that they're really dealing with is that they are the mind. They are the mind composite. You know what that's called? Antahakarana. Dual mind, which thinks this and that, higher and lower, virtue and vice. That's dual mind, is one element of the mind. Chitta is its thoughts. So mind, manas, and chitta. Its thoughts are also positive, negative, mixed, brooding, elated, and so forth. That's the second aspect of the mind. Then ahamkara is the ego, which is there kind of along for the ride. And it's riding in a chariot called the intellect, the buddhi. And the buddhi is taking it here and there to different worlds, because the intellect formed everything. Like Vikalpa style, see, as we were reading in here. Out of desire it formed everything, so it has this fourfold composite that it's riding around on. It's like a chariot with horses, and that was the way Krishna sometimes explains it in earlier times. So with that fourfold mental composite called the antakarana, which actually is a very good teaching because it means inner cause. Anta, inner, karana, cause. So they look at the mind as being the inner cause to everything. Therefore, where are you going to go to cut off the cause to do away with the effects? You're going to have to go to the mind. So in their songs, in their scriptures, and in their caves, and even in their private studies, in their palaces, they'll retire into those places and take their mind and say, "What are you doing? Why are you wasting time? You can do all this if you want, but you've got to put Dharma first. You can have all this wealth and this pleasure and all that, but you have to put truth first and foremost. You can love the world and your children and your wives and your husbands and everything, but you have to love God first and foremost." So that's one of the drawbacks to the firm problem or the firm stance of asceticism. I renounce it all. See? So now it's not Brahman anymore, because you have to renounce everything that's not Brahman. But once you see it's all Brahman, then how are you going to renounce that when it's everything? So Janaka is actually in a very prime position to realize the non-dual truth and know that one very Advaitic axiom, that I and my Father are one and all this is Brahman. Whereas other souls are not necessarily placed in that position yet. They don't have a lot of wealth. They don't have a lot of opulence. They've never had to walk through the garden and sing songs of mourning, been caught off guard by Maya, you see, necessarily. So Janaka is placed in a very good position to attain that which is beyond even the dualities of massive wealth and poverty. And so he can, at that juncture, he can see his mind as the author of all of it and get full mastery of his mind and become a transcendental realizer of Atmagyan, which he's going to get to here. Last quote here on this chart, it's also a quick study. Shankara says, "Neither by weapons, by scriptures, by fire, by water, nor by millions of different kinds of works can this tree of samsara be hewn down, but only by discrimination leading to knowledge of the self." I was just writing in my book on the rishis of India, and all these charts are going to be contained in it. I'm in the 10th chapter of 10 chapters now, almost finished with it. And I had to all of a sudden write on the importance of self-knowledge or self-realization. Because you have other things there. You have dharmic life, and you have Ishvara, taking refuge in Ishvara, and you have non-dual Brahman. But there's another thing there that's very important to India's whole spiritual ideology, and that's called self-knowledge or self-realization. Quite often it's cited by beings like Krishna as being the highest of all. If you could actually realize yourself, then Ishvara, Brahman, and scriptures would be as helpful to you as water tanks when there's a flood all around. Sri Krishna said, what good are water tanks when everything's flooded all around the whole land from the monsoons? So all of this would become coincidental or insubstantial if you had self-knowledge. That's how important it is to realize your true nature. And it's available most readily. It's more available in Brahman, it's more available in Ishvara, and it's more available in Dharma. Your own self-knowledge is immediate if you can find your orientation to it and call it up. Thin the curtain of nations, whatever you have to do to see it and utilize it. So I found myself writing about the higher characteristics of self-knowledge in that book recently, and basically you see Shankara saying pretty much here the same thing. Water, fire, weapons, progeny, millions of works, never hew down this tree of samsara, and actually it'll cause more branches, more buds, more fruits to grow on it. Maybe higher, better fruits even, which could be higher, deeper problems for someone like Janaka, you see. But what if you just hew it down with self-knowledge? The whole tree lies inside of me. And my mind is at its root. See? My mind is there. Body-mind mechanism is at its root. So, a little bit of expansion on one of the melodies of morning of Janaka. Let's go back then to these other ones in the remaining time in this first half. The penultimate one is, youth is ignorance, adulthood is base desire, old age is suffering. So he's not concerning himself just with the present problem, locking himself in the chamber saying, okay, I've got to get to the root of this. That's very good. But when he gets to the root of it, he's going to have to look into his past lifetimes and various things that we've just talked about. Maybe espy the curtain in nescience and find out why that's thick. He's got to use all these little weapons towards all of these causes of problems that are in his mind. And so he's going to have to look at his whole life and his previous lifetimes. So he says, youth is ignorance, adulthood is base desire, old age is suffering. So probably nothing and no one better to describe that than Shankara. Kate kanta kaste putra samsaro yamativa vichitra kashyatvam katakuta yasta statvam chintaya tadiya brata bhaja govindam mudamate samprapte sanihite kale nahi rakshati dukrim karane. So he says, when I was a baby, I was attached to my mother's breast. When I was a young boy, I was attached to sport. Or in this culture, sports. You know what's happened to sports lately with $1 million salaries and preoccupation with balls and so forth. And then he says, when I was a young man, I was attached to a young woman. When I was old, I was attached to anxiety, brooding, see. But alas, to the Supreme Brahman, I was never attached. So doesn't it pretty much sound like Janaka's song earlier than Shankara? Youth is ignorance, adulthood is base desire, old age is suffering. So he's getting his mind ready for some better melodies to sing. And the last one here that I left for the for the end on purpose is very poetic. My mind ghost dances in the world theater due to the hollow tune of the 5 sense organs. So my mind ghost dances to the hollow tune of the sense organs. That's why I put up this chart. The ancient rishis, as we were saying, had a way of explaining samsara or maya, and they were very proficient at giving the soul permission to live life in the body, at the same time warning it strictly about the dangers there. So in the ancient rishis' time, they would post something like the mighty river of the manifested Brahman. So right away they're saying, oh, there must be an unmanifested Brahman, you see. No problem, no problem. You're formless. You're beyond fear, doubt, and ignorance. You don't have old age, death, youth, adulthood. Desires aren't there. The formless Brahman is the solution to everything. Sri Ramakrishna said, everything is soluble into Brahman. All forms, just like they were all made of sugar or salt or matter or earth or whatever. When they encounter the formless Brahman, they just dissolve there. Your mind's thoughts also just dissolve there. So go and encounter the formless Brahman. See what it's like. Stand on that ocean of formless Brahman and give yourself to it in meditation. There might be a time when your mind's curtain of meshes is a little thick, and you see that ocean of Brahman in your meditations, and you're afraid of it. You see. But wait, there might be another time when the curtain of meshes is rather thin because of your practice, the fruits of your practice. You'll stand on that self-same ocean of Brahman and feel like jumping in. So this is the positive side of what Holy Mother called perseverance. So the soul must persevere under all conditions, remain on vigil, have fealty to revealed scriptures, guru, dharma, sangha, sadhana, and use its suffering as a wedge to free itself from the same. Turn and face the brutes, if you know what I mean. So if we look at the river of the manifest Brahman, before we go on to take this rest of this chart, you can see the Svetasvatara Upanishad there. And I'm going to read it and see if you recognize it. And that one who projected consciousness, who is the bridge of immortality, ever tranquil over the wavy and unnavigable ocean of samsara, who delivered the Vedas as a life raft, who is the purifying fire of the mantra stationed firmly in Mayak waters. I go for refuge in that effulgent one, whose clear light turns one's understanding towards the Atman. Yes, that is, some people are nodding their head. That is what I chanted at the very beginning of this class. Yo Brahmanan yo vidadati purvam, yo vai vedamscha prahinohi tashmai, and tanha devaha atma buddhi prakasha. And then that one who is the eternal bridge to immortality, I go take refuge in that. Mumukshurvai Sharnagataham Prapadye. At that padye, at that lotus feet, I take refuge, Sharnagata, for my own liberation. In that spiritually emancipated condition, I take refuge. So that's from the Svetasvatara Upanishad. That's newly presented to SRV students to begin to memorize that Sanskrit and the English. So as far as the teaching goes, here's why we're finding out that he's talking about mind ghosts dancing in the world theater to the tune of the 5 senses and all the 5 senses connection. So this is a teaching simultaneously about the dangers that the quintuplication process presents to the human soul. I would say that if the human soul comes to know pancha, that is panchakarna, the 5-fold cause to everything, And then from the fivefold mind to the five subtle senses and the five subtle elements, to the gross senses, to the gross elements, and and with the five pranas in between and the five tanmatras. If it comes to know that as stations in a fivefold process through which consciousness gets to earth and the human body, and it can also reverse that process, sancharaha prati sancharaha, Kapila says, if there's an evolution of principles, there also has to be an involution of the same. So consciousness used these as five-fold steps coming out, 5 of them basically, and then 5 steps returning. Then it can reincarnate as many times as it wants, and it can get back to Brahman at the end of its play in the fields of the Lord. If it does not know these, or any system that's similar to it, then the breadcrumbs have been pecked away by little birds, and by the time its life is over, it cannot find itself back to the light. The dots are not connected anymore. They've been decayed by upbringing and conditioning and karmas and a whole host of other ills that we're going through in the Kali Yuga nowadays in all countries. Then that's going to be a very difficult proposition to find yourself back to your true self, to get self-knowledge. So we're going to have to take this up after the break, but you can see there that it all starts on meditating on the manifest Brahman, who is like a mighty river. So I'll leave you with that, and we'll take up the fivefold process after the break. Thank you for your kind attention. We here at the Spiritual Center in Waimea welcome you all back to the second half of the first class on suffering, striving, and Samadhi, or dukkha, sadhana, and Samadhi in Sanskrit. In the first half, we have taken about 1/4 of Janaka's song of victory, the part where he had to teach his mind about the sobering appearances of Maya, which assail everyone who enters into the body, name and form. We were talking at the break about it in Dharmic fashion, how our own ideals like Swami Vivekananda and Sri Sharda Devi spoke about the difficulties of keeping Brahman in mind while you still have to go about your daily affairs of work and child rearing and various things that many of us have to accomplish in this lifetime. Hopefully we accomplish it in the right orientation and with some success, because what I've been hearing lately a lot from old students who have come back and from friends and people is that when I knew them, they didn't have children. Then they come back to me 20, 25 years later, and I hear from them, and they have children who are drug addicts and children who are having all sorts of problems. And I hear that's an old repeated story that isn't good to hear, and it shows the lack of dharma being taught and discipline being ingrained in young people. And so if you want to look for examples of that in olden times, you can find it too, although the aberrations or the impurities may have changed a bit. But basically it's all there in the 6 passions and 8 fetters and all the problems of Maya, just coming forth in different forms nowadays, and people suffering them as a result and not knowing why they're suffering. So we looked at this recently, how objects and 5 senses and keeping contact with them in an unguarded fashion without remaining on vigil and being very careful, how that can upset life along the way, in the interim or in the duration, at one time or another. And so it's like King Janaka, to them it's like a gut check. I had to explain that term to somebody at the break who hadn't heard it before. But it's like this testing of the mind, and the mind that's already used to freedom, has a taste of freedom. If it comes too close to Maya and stays there long enough, it'll react. So it'll throw up a poison in the mind, saying, beware, be careful. And that's what's happened to Janaka, who's known throughout the 3 worlds as being a luminary, living liberated soul. And he was the one that woke Sukadeva up to his enlightenment and so forth, when his father Vedavyas couldn't do it. So there are differences in the way people come upon these melodies of mourning that we just looked through. And the last one, dancing in the mind theater and so forth, brought us into this chart from the Svetashvatara Upanishad about taking refuge in Brahman. I go for refuge in that Supreme Brahman who turns our understanding to the Atman, when it seems like nothing else does or will. We have to entertain that formless Brahman, back to the teaching of the curtain of nescience and the fear of formlessness. It goes that deep in us that all we have to do is glom onto or grasp onto form and cling to life. And that's the alternative for people who don't have the wherewithal to turn in a different direction, like the emptiness of things, the insubstantiality of things, the bliss of formlessness, higher samadhi without name and form. All these things are available too to the soul. And if that's not there, the options remaining are not all that promising. Even dharmic life can just end in dharmic life. We know that moral life can just end in going to heaven. The Upanishads have told us that those are heaven-seeking souls. In fact, the Svetashvatara Upanishad has a beautiful chant about the heaven-aspiring senses, and how that just brings a person back to earth again. So long ago, when they've explored, like the Tibetans did, and we studied it 4 weeks ago too, they studied the transition of the soul, the bardo that it goes into after death, and the bardo it comes back to in life, and the different bardos it goes through. When you study that and become aware of it, then you're also aware of these apparent movements of the soul and what conditionings they bring along with them. And it makes you much more sensitive to, let's say, accumulating baggage, karmic baggage along the way. My teacher's name, one definition for it could be the bliss of not having any residue, ashesha, not having any residue at the end of your life. So he lived in such a way that he could easily slough off the body and give up the mind, and just attain his true nature, the ananda, the bliss of his true nature, as soon as it became necessary to do so. Of course, he was a monk for 70, 80 years of his life, so he had long, deep practice in that and was a great example for us. When you get to an earlier time, before the Vedanta period, you've got the Vedas, the Vedic rishis, then you have these ways in which these great masters looked at life. They're masters of life, and they're also removers of the miseries of the devotees. So they wanted to make sure their families and their children and their grandchildren and their students were all informed of the Dharma and all armed to the teeth with all the necessary arsenal of ignorance-destroying weapons that were available to them in the tradition. And so some cautionary things were available too, but given in a fashion to say just be careful of these whirlpools. That's basically here. We started out, first you meditate on the manifest Brahman, who is like a mighty river. It's very much like Lord Kapula's wanting you to meditate on the fourfold mind and the subtle senses in dream, and the subtle elements in dream, and the gross elements here, your gross senses here, the objects here. You can take any little thing and meditate on it, instead of just own it, see, or possess it, or hate it, or love it, or take it to be real and actual, and to not see the emptiness inside of it, that it comes from another source, that it has a different origin than nature. I mean, there's a number of things in which you can take an object to task about, what to speak the fact that it actually was produced by your mind, not by nature. Nature just provided the 5 elements. So that's kind of what's explained here in this sets of 5s here. So we meditate on the manifest Brahman. What's it mean? Oh, they actually did meditate upon God with form. And they thought of it as a mighty river, whose source is the boundless ocean. What is the source, the boundless ocean? Is it Brahman? No, because Brahman doesn't produce anything. Brahman stands as the underlying foundation of everything that gets produced by, guess who? The mind. At that level, cosmic mind, and eventually turns into the collective mind, and finally to the individual mind. So that source, which is the boundless ocean for this river of mighty Brahman, is the mind. It all comes flowing through the mind. If you've watched the last series of some 5 or 6 classes over the last 2 months, you've seen me present the mind-only perspective again and again and again at my class. Talk about something that you should meditate upon. You should probably take your mind off the fact that nature is somehow producing things without any other help, and that you don't have any responsibility for it, or for but more like the 5 elements came out of you, and they're there in your subtle senses. Air, earth, fire, water, and ether are there in your dream state. So if they're there in your dream state, they got brought out into the waking state and solidified here with the help of gross nature. This is called connecting fives, instead of just believing in the outer five and forgetting anything that was the origin to that. Forgetting the source. So the source for all projection then here is the mind, they say. There you see that I explained earlier, antakarna, it's manas, buddhi, chitta, and ahamkara. And if you put mahat with that, then it's fivefold. Mahat would be the great mind. And out of the great mind comes all these sparks off the fire, which are collective minds, like the devas and devis and the angels and ancestors. And off of them came these other sparks, which are the human beings and the animals and insects and so forth. So everything coming off of the mind. So if you put the mahat in the picture, which you probably should, then you have a fivefold mind. Well, let me read the whole sloka. We meditate on the manifest Brahman, who is like a mighty river, whose source is the boundless ocean, which is fed by 5 surging streams, which contains 5 dangerous whirlpools filled with innumerable confusions, which sports 5 unpredictable currents, which is agitated by 5 great tides, and which is attended by 5 swirling rapids. I don't think the ancient rishis of the Vedic period could be any clearer about the quintuplication process, and how 5 is not just an important number from some sort of silly numerology science, but that it's actually a stepping stone, a series of stepping stones out of which the soul comes from formlessness into form. Why it does so? Who knows? So many reasons. But when they asked Vivekananda, should a man be reborn? He said, I certainly hope he will not till he can do so in full consciousness. Well, how many of us are being born into these worlds of name and form in full consciousness? Besides him. So, and he even admitted to suffering here in the realm of Maya. Sri Ramakrishna even said, even Brahman weeps caught in the net of Maya. Caught in the net of its own Maya. So it's very much like our own predicament. We have a mind, and then we catch ourselves by the mind inside the realm of the mind. So we have to then come to that boundless source up here and free ourselves from that very mind. So we saw what the fourfold mind is made up. Now that we've read the sloka, it's fed by 5 surging streams, which are the 5 senses. You could sing about that. Say if you were the avatut, you could sing something like Nirmoha moha padivita name vikalpa Nishoka shoka padivita name vikalpa Nirloba loba padivita name vikalpa Gyanamritam samarasam gaganopamoham samsara satatilata nachame vidachit samtosha shantati soko nachame kadachit Agyana bandhanamidam nachame midavit Gyanamritam samarasam gaganopamoham Gyanamritam samarasam gaganopamoham. So, about the 5 senses, which we were just talking about, he sings in beautiful fashion. I am never harried by delusion and its lack. Grief and absence of grief do not occur in me, and it is the same with the presence of greed and disappearance. I am pure existence, wisdom, and bliss, as boundless as the sky, infinite like space. The clinging creeper of birth and death has fallen off my true body, and I have found that the happiness and miseries of the senses that belong to life are not my true self. Rather, and instead, I am pure existence, wisdom, and bliss, as boundless as the sky and infinite like space. So great souls like Janaka is, and has to do this gut check of deep discrimination every once in a while, in the midst of all the things Maya, come to this conclusion. Be careful of the five senses, hearing, seeing, touching, tasting, and smelling, because they are as if that problem that feeds this ocean of the mind. And of course, if the mind does not control the senses control the mind. And in that way, people run afoul of life. This ocean also contains 5 dangerous whirlpools filled with innumerable confusions. And those are the subtle senses. So from gross senses, we stop, you see in the West. Tasting, touching, hearing, smelling, seeing. We don't even connect those to air, earth, fire, water, and ether as if they have some sort of deep origin with each other. But even short of that, then we don't go, instead of outward to connect, we don't go inward to connect too, that maybe these senses have an origin of their own, which isn't just of the body. Because we started out saying the whole thing is of the mind, so why are we relegating everything to the body? We should probably look into the mind to find out that we have a state called dreaming. Swapna. So Jagrat is waking, Swapna is dreaming, and Sushupti is deep sleep. So we have 3 states of our consciousness. 1, 2, 3 states. And then, of course, a transcendent state called Turiya, yes, which just simply means the 4th. They didn't want to put any grand name on it. There's a 4th state beyond waking, dreaming, and deep sleep. We saw that in the teaching of the Curtain of Nescience. See, the Curtain of Nescience falls over waking, dreaming, and deep sleep, all 3. If you don't believe me, try and remember your deep sleep last night. Where was it? What is it? Who was I when I went into it? What happened to everything? Even my ego. Everything went away. See, so who asks these important questions about formlessness? See, they fear it. They fear and doubt it. They fear the emptiness of form. They fear about formlessness, and maybe they don't even come to expect that maybe even objects are empty because they seem substantial, you see. It's the way 5 elements and 5 senses have been set up. So in order to find out how to unset them, you're going to have to go back to your subtle senses. Where are your subtle senses in dream tonight? What's in your dream tonight? Air, earth, fire, water, and ether. Seeing, tasting, touching, hearing, and smelling in a subtle form. It's really that simple, folks. But you're going to have to believe that your dreams are much more than just signposts or much more than just coincidences. That they're actually stepping stones back into an original state of mind that's formless. That's the real reason. People are trying to put all sorts of meaning into their dreams. There's no meaning to dream. There's no meaning to waking. We said that. The fathers of Advaita Vedanta. There is a dream, a meaning to deep sleep, because the gunas have been put into abeyance. That is, your depression, your restlessness, and even your happiness have gone to sleep, in deep sleep. And you're doing just fine as a result of that. You awaken refreshed. So, not much meaning to your dreams then. Of course, if dreams are coming from beyond the curtain of nescience, from her, then they're meditations, not dreams. My teacher used to say, "A man has come to me from a land that never sleeps." Now all my dreams have been turned into radiant meditations. So when his guru, Advaita guru, came, that is his guru Viveka, not just the old scriptures, but the revealed scriptures, not just the ordinary guru, but the revealed guru, came, and he showed me that my states of consciousness were waking, dreaming, and deep sleep. Then I started meditating on my dreams, and I turned them into radiant meditations. This art has been taught to me by a master, the song goes on to sing. It's a beautiful song of Ramprasad Sen in India. So my teacher used to recite that in his lectures. Man has come to me from a land that never sleeps. So then if you're looking at this in terms of the 5 subtle senses, those are your dream senses. And the kingdoms of heaven are there inside of you. You're not finding them outside, because that's not heaven up there. That's just the element ether and the element earth and the element fire. You don't even have water and air up there, evidently. Not yet. So you only got 3 elements, and you're looking into a physical sky as if God is up there, or if there's something fulfilling up there. Not even the kingdoms of heaven are there. They're inside of you. How do you know? Because you have subtle senses. So let me backtrack. We meditate on the manifest Brahman, who is a mighty river, whose source is the boundless ocean, which is fed by 5 surging streams, called the 5 senses, which contains 5 dangerous whirlpools filled with innumerable confusions. Those are the subtle senses in your dreams tonight. How many people have been able to make sense out of their dreams? How many people have been able to see them as the kingdoms of heaven within? How many people have been able to own them as your mind's own projections? It's not done. It's not thought of. It's all figment of your imagination or some coincidence, you see. But these are actually stepping stones, 5-fold stepping stones back inside, in which you can get across this river of the manifest Brahman. Further onward, which sports 5 unpredictable currents. Those are, of course, earth, air, fire, water, and ether. Returning to the manifest Brahman's mighty river. So basically you can see how the order they've put this in is mind, senses, and now coming to the 5 elements. As if there is some connection between these 5s. It's not too hard. We like to say early yoga 101 is basically taking earth and connecting it with smell. Taking water, connecting it with taste. Taking fire and connecting it with sight. Taking air and connecting it with touch. Taking ether and connecting it with hearing. So you have the 5 correlations between the 5 senses and the 5 elements going outward. Now turn them in on themselves, because if you leave them outward, they look like their own causes. They look real. But they're the effects of other causes which are subtler. And this is how to map your consciousness and to inspect the kingdoms of heaven within you is by conscious inspection of your dreams. Not enjoying lucid dream. That may happen. You have to inspect your dreams as if they were stations where your consciousness visits. And also come to know, as Janaka is coming to know, that it also vacates them after it uses them. So they must not be some place that you want to live. Nice place to visit, but I wouldn't want to live there. See, as the saying goes. So Janaka is going through this with his mind, you see, inside. And going on to finish his chart, which is agitated by 5 great tides. That's prana, udana, samana, vyana, and apana. That's a teaching also missing in the West, that there is life force. The closest thing I correlate it to with what we do know with some of the cryptic sayings of Jesus are, man does not live by bread alone. Some people would interpret that to mean they live by spirit. But nobody lives by spirit. They live by mind, senses, prana, elements. Because that's life. But there's something called eternal life. That's the Almighty Father. It's not in form. It doesn't have cause and effect attached to it. It doesn't taste, touch, hear, smell, and see. It doesn't become matter, air, fire, water, and ether. These are manifestations of the mind. So we separate out the mind from Brahman. It's just like you separated out the body from your dream state. I'm not the body because it dies. Well, I'm not the mind either because that brain mechanism in that mind also dissolves away. At death, in deep sleep it dissolves, and in Samadhi, which Janaka is going to tell us about. Hopefully by the end of this class, if I can get to it. So, 5 pranas. Of course, I could put up 2 or 3 charts about that. Look on our other YouTube classes that are available to find teachings on the 5 pranas. I've given plenty of them. Finally, which is attended by 5 swirling rapids, the 5-fold miseries of birth, disease, old age, decay, and death. So the rishis are cautioning you, evidently, aren't they? Yes, you can enter into the manifest Brahman. It would be good if you saw it as the manifest Brahman rather than as Maya or as something real when it's not, or as something unchanging, which it isn't. It would be better if you entered into it with knowledge of your consciousness and knowing the 5-fold stations to which it associates with, but that it should never identify with. Even if it does identify with it, it should then disidentify with it as soon as it can. So that it's always proving to itself, I am Atma Brahma. This self is pure conscious awareness. It's not a thought that comes from the mind. It's not energy, and it's not matter. That's about as simple as you can describe it. The Atman is not thought, energy, or matter. So it's pure conscious awareness. And when you get into Samadhi, you'll know that. So Janaki's probably had enough of pleasure gardens for a while. He wants to get back into full-blown Samadhi. He wants his lotus to bloom 1,000-fold so that he can have that refreshing drink of consciousness that will cause all the lotuses in all the worlds to bloom. He longs after that the way the siddhas and the sadhus in his garden are longing after it. See, he caught their fire. Vivekananda used to say that when he was alive. All of you, you haven't caught my fire yet. See? He was fully ablaze as a fully realized soul, a nitya siddha. That means eternally perfect in his essence. Who said that about him? The avatar of the age, Sri Ramakrishna Paramahamsa, the Matri avatar. You know, the one we sing to when we sing Parama Guru Sri Ramakrishna, Parama Guru Sri Ramakrishna, Laho Pranam Namaskar, and so forth. Beautiful songs written to Sri Ramakrishna, even during his own life. So there you have it. Shall I repeat it? We meditate on the manifest Brahman, who is like a mighty river, whose source is the boundless ocean, which is the mind, which is fed by 5 surging streams, the 5 senses, which contains 5 dangerous whirlpools filled with innumerable confusions, the 5 subtle senses in dream, which sports 5 unpredictable currents, the 5 elements, which is agitated by 5 great tides, the 5 life forces, and which is attended by 5 swirling rapids, the 5 miseries of birth, disease, old age, decay, and death. This is the mighty river of Brahman, which the rishis tell us about. It's one sloka out of the Svetashvatara Upanishad. Now, this is how I like to unwrap a sloka. With the explanations and charts for us all to see should become fully apparent to us then, once we've seen them, what our business is, in which chamber we have to go into, lock ourselves in, telling everyone, don't bother me until I get to the bottom of this. Like Janaka is doing and did thousands of years ago. Last quote here by Sri Ramakrishna, as we just mentioned him. The ignorant soul being born into the world is like an unfortunate man accidentally falling into the whirlpool of Vishalakshi, from which he will never return. But for an illumined soul in the world, all is Brahman. There is the Ganges, for instance. If a man touches its waters anywhere, he can declare, I have touched the Ganges. It is not necessary for him to touch the entire river from Ardwar all the way down to Ganga Sagar. I know I've been along that river for that distance. So basically, you can touch it anywhere and say, I touched the Ganges. Probably want to do it there at Varanasi, see, where I committed my brother's ashes with lay and into the water there in Varanasi. So basically, what I wanted to comment on here is that the whirlpool of Vishalakshi. I selected this out of the Gospel of Ramakrishna because Sri Ramakrishna mentions that. Evidently they're in the river nearby where he lived, and maybe it was near Kamarpakur. There's a river and there's a whirlpool there called Vishalakshi. And if they weren't careful, children would get sucked into it, and even full-grown men would get sucked into it and drowned there. So they actually used that as a warning. Don't go near that whirlpool, Vishalakshi. You'll get sucked in and die. So Sri Ramakrishna is using it then in such a way as to show us how the mighty river of Brahman has whirlpools, eddies, streams running in and out of it. It has ocean as its source. It's got great tides that change it all the time, and swirling rapids. So we must be very careful when you take a body. And the Dharma is the way to conduct yourself in and out. Let's go back now on this, because we've had another nice sidetrack, but a very effective one, into this teaching. Let's look then at the improvisational airs on awakening, the second part of Janaki's trip here, inward. Detecting the vile thief of my Atmic jewel and expelling him. That's one air on awakening. I will do away with this vile thief of my Atmic jewel, which is basically the deluded mind, an ego. It's telling him other than what he is, trying to get him to see that he's matter or thought or energy, so forth and so on, and that he's not this stainless, perfect self within called the Atman. Learning the art of japa and meditation from my guru. There was another nice improvisation. Now that he's guided his mind through the melodies of morning, now he's got some musical ability, you see, free of all of this too many minor keys, you see. Now he's got some major thirds playing into it and so forth, and some ennobling fourths and fifths, and this music is becoming like you've heard here. So basically he his next improvisational air is, oh, I have to run back to my guru and make sure that my practice of japa and meditation is current, mature, and supporting me in my spiritual endeavors towards enlightenment. And also dispelling mental unrealities like I and you from the mind. So, or you could say I, me, and mind, as Sri Ramakrishna used to say that. It could also be I, me, mine, and mind. But I, me, and mine, he wanted those transformed into thou, thee, and thine. So if you say I, me, and mine all the time, then the ego grows in that kind of atmosphere. And then it can delude the mind and its thoughts, chitta, into believing such nonsense. But if you always are giving it away, thou, thee, and thine, then it becomes selfless endeavor, and the true self comes forward, and the false self falls behind. The usurper to the throne, as King Janaka knows well about usurpers, other kings who are jealous of him, who want his lands. The Itihasa and scriptures of India are full of stories about that. And Narada there pictured is also among them in those stories. So basically you have the need then to dethrone the ego and resurrect the true self in its place. Because when that's in charge, everything is beautiful. Then didn't it say here, all this becomes Brahman, right? And the only distinction you'll make is that this is the manifest Brahman, which suggests to you that there must also be an unmanifested Brahman. Interestingly enough, the soul did the same juxtaposition when it took up nature. There's a manifested Prakriti, but what we don't know in the West, because we don't know about subtle elements and subtle dream senses, is that there's also an unmanifested Prakriti. That can go all the way to the deep sleep and appear to you as seeds. So maybe in your deep sleep the curtain of nescience is too thick and it's not letting you see the seeds that you're watering to bring you back into the waking state. Lifetime after lifetime, billions of souls are watering those seeds without knowing that they exist. Do they think it exists here? Everything around them is seeds and growth, yet they can't make the connection that all of this in the mind, these are manifestations of seeds that are in the mind, and the manifestations of your dream seeds in your dream state are deep sleep seeds. So everything is from a seed. In the beginning was the Word was with God, the Word was God. Om is the greatest seed of all. It's the root, bijam, to everything. So, aham brahmasmi, I, that I, is a very good way to use the word. See, or sakshaham kara, I am the witness. That's another good way to use the I, to ripen it. But bhutahamkara, I am all this, I'm all this seeds, I'm all these trees, I'm all this nature, I'm physical matter. That's not a very good thing to feed to the ego. It'll come to believe it, and then it'll produce lifetimes of thinking it's the physical body. It will never know anything about the seeds in its mind that it can water to bring out a Vivekananda, or to bring out a Sri Ramakrishna, or to bring out other great souls, the rishis, and those that can even inspect the manifest Brahman and warn you about it, can bring out all sorts of teachers, gurus, acharyas, sampradayas, darshanas, religions even, from seeds in the mind. Those are the ones that inform us. Those are the ones that elucidate the process for us, like a fivefold process. And so we read about these in the revealed scriptures and we perk up, you see. Aha, this is different than the 7-day creation theory and the I am a sinner behind it. This is also different than the I was once a monkey or a paramecium billions of years ago evolution theory. This means I am, and I come from that, and I return to that, and there are many different ways in which you can explain that, in which they will explain it to you should you apprentice them and entertain teachings that are leaning towards non-duality, that lean away from the manifest to the unmanifest, whether that manifested is the soul as body or whether it's nature as matter. Leans toward the unmanifested or towards emptiness, formlessness. Don't let the word emptiness daunt you. It's a beautiful teaching. And when everything is empty inside you, that's when you'll have light. That's when you'll have freedom. That's when you can really breathe. That's when you'll be inspired. When all that weight has been taken off you. Down in the steaming valleys, the bogs and the cities and the vibrations down there, Lord Buddha said, I look at that from the mountaintop. I'm up here in the air of breathless heights, thinking high, breathing high, feeling high, having compassion for those beings down there who won't grow some legs and start walking up to meet me. Develop some muscles for the inner climb. Because it's going to take strength. Spiritual life, Vivekananda said, is not for the weak. It's going to take some strength on your part. That is strength of mind. Strength of body helps, but its orientation shifts there from mere mountain climbing to climbing the elevations of enlightenment. That's different. The precipitous ascent to higher awareness, we call it. That's an inward journey. Here's a good one. Never allowing delusion and entrance into the mind again. Like standing at the front of the line and interviewing each person that wants to get into your house. You see, do you have delusion? Are you named delusion? No? Oh, you can pass. You see, so you scrutinize very deeply what the earmarks and appearances of delusion are, and you're very aware of them. Janaka is showing you this right now. Had everything, drank his milk from a brimming cup, yet here he is, shut away somewhere in a monk's cave, as it were, and taking his mind to task and seeing if he really still loves God instead of mammon. Then, boring a hole in the pearl of the mind to dispel darkness. Sri Ramakrishna used that analogy too. He said, once I was meditating in the Panchavati and in the jungle there, and I was in my mind, she was meditating, and I started digging in the ground. It was like taking a nail knife and digging in the ground, but he was actually digging in his mind. He said, then all of a sudden I started digging, and then dirt kept filling up that hole. So thoughts kept filling up that hole. He said, finally I made a very big opening. End of story. It's as much as he tells you, so much as they heard to repeat to you. So his implication is he bore a hole in the pearl of the mind and saw through to the other side, to formlessness. Because the mind is the form-producing machine. It should be obvious to you. Boundless source is the mind. That's the ocean out of which everything comes. Samsara Sagara, the ocean of delusion, which is why he's mourning, you see. That's samsara. It's mentioned twice here. Now he wants to get to the samsara, the Ananda Sagara, the ocean of bliss inside of him. So he's going to have to pass through the mind to do that. The mind is caught up in its own bliss. That's called the ego. It's called sasmita. My bliss is with ego. It's for my individual self to enjoy. But the great seers, with the great seal, bore through that. So up there he said he learned the art of japa and meditation. So with that, it's probably a good complement to explain how he's going to bore a hole in the mind. So like meditating on it with your third eye, you see, after you've got your heart open. Because you don't want to meditate here until the heart opens fully. And then all of a sudden you've got that power of love and compassion and wisdom from these lower centers. And you can concentrate that. Totapari even took a piece of glass and shoved it in Sri Ramakrishna's third eye at one point when he was teaching him Advaita. And Sri Ramakrishna had a marvelous opening. He said, all the gods and goddesses split apart when Totapari did that to me. And Totapari was amazed that Sri Ramakrishna attained that in just a day or so. So it would be like singing Brahmadyaha Surya Ganaha Katam Matra Shanti Svargadayo Vasatraya Katamatra Shanti Yadyeka Rupa Amalam Paramartha Tattvam Gyanamritam Samarasam Gaganopamoham Gyanamritam Samarasam Gaganopamoham. So boring a hole in the mind, what does it do? In the Supreme Brahman, all the gods merge. Therefore, all the many worlds and lokas that the gods preside over also melt away, soluble into Brahman. The three worlds are thus seen as dreamlike projections, where I am pure existence, wisdom, and bliss, as boundless as the sky and infinite like space. So that's what boring a hole in the mind is like. Everything falls into that hole and merges soluble into Brahman. And in an unspeakable experience. So you have to put it on, get noble, get beyond the mind somehow, and concentrate on Sri Ramakrishna and that experience and have it happen to you. Janaki is having it recur on him. He's got thoughts of wealth and rulers and kingdoms and affairs of the court and everything that he's been conducting for a while. He has to go away and get free with it, which is why we want you to come to retreat here in 2 weeks in Hawaii. Come to our next retreat, or come to the American River Retreat in California, or come to our seminar, which will sing this entire stotram I've been selecting from in Portland, so that you too can get away from the world, away from cell phones, away from everything that impedes you, everything that causes you to brood and thicken the curtain of nescience, all the politics, all the business that's being conducted, the affairs of matter and materials, all the acts that are being done, good, bad, and indifferent and mixed. Put them all on hold and get a true glimpse of yourself. Come, bore a hole with us. It'll be a different kind of boring. Finally, his last improvisational air, an air is like a melody, kind of, is stringing my mala with the thread of sobering experiences. So he has not quite reached victory, and there's a bittersweet taste, smell, touch to everything right now in his improvisational airs. After all, they are improvisations. See, they're not like set in stone musical compositions or something. They're improvisations. His mind is getting free again by those improvisations. They're lifting up. You see, Sri Ramakrishna said, like, a hot air balloon always goes up, so you have to make your mind like a hot air balloon, buoyant. And then you don't really have to destroy anything. You just rise up above it, and the higher you rise, the lower everything goes away. He used to say that about visiting the Okterloni monument in the park in Calcutta. He said, I went up that, and there was a lot of hubbub and of the city and screaming and cars and various things. He went up the monument, and from on top of it, he could see all of that disappear and all the noise quiet down. And so he said, then we talked about that as being like making the mind buoyant, like a hot air balloon. So you must try that. That's an improvisation your mind might want to take up. Let's look on to the variations on a theme of victory. Anybody who has a composer or plays music knows that there's a theme and then there's variations. So you want to get out your counterpoint and get out your harmonies and your various tools of music so that you can play these variations. Because playing the same melody over and over again might not be so entertaining to people. Oh, I heard that again. But what if you heard it in a little different way? It's very much like Dharma. Hearing the truth just one way all the time, but all of a sudden you hear it from different approaches, even maybe different religions or different teachers. All of a sudden you find out that these are variations that are very helpful to your spiritual practice. So these variations came forth after his improvisations. Victory over my great adversary, the deluded mind. My great adversary is your own mind. See. Disappearance of the suffering that had afflicted me. In teachings in yoga is that you suffer, Buddhism too, so you take on the suffering, you find its cause, and then you get beyond it. So suffering is, they say, better than pleasure. Sri Krishna says, like in the Gita, what's sweet in the beginning turns sour later. So you don't want that. But what's sour in the beginning will turn sweet later. So it sounds like that's what you want. So suffering is sour in the beginning. Sadhana is sour in the beginning. Striving is sour in the beginning. That you have to attain something, and so that your mind will rest there in that attainment. Some meat under its belt, as it were, some substance in it, so that it can rest there for a while and go inward further and further. So the whole thing I'm saying here is that Father of Yoga says that suffering can be transcended. And it seems like the Four Noble Truths also lead you in that direction. When you see people in Samadhi, which is Ananda or bliss, different kinds of Samadhi, then you know that for as long as they're in Samadhi anyway, they're not suffering. And when they come out of Samadhi, the only suffering they experience is, hey, where did God go? So it's sometimes they call the wise in the world have one default zone, forbearance. So if the wise come out of Samadhi, then they have to forbear the world until God makes its next appearance, until they bore that next hole, until they reach that next echelon of consciousness that one can acclimatize to and stay at, so without falling off again. It's like that breath, the ennobling breath. This time it doesn't let you down. You don't come back down out of the mountains. So the transcendence of suffering is the main theme in higher teachings of yoga. Third, the attainment of a life and mind filled with quiescence. You see, peace of mind. The seers all like that idea of peace of mind. So maybe even beyond forbearance, which would be a necessary thing in the realm of name and form, is this state of mind that's quiescent. It's equanimous. It's peaceful. It's the peace that passes all understanding even. So that is a state that is penultimate and desirable only next to that ultimate state. That would be a default zone for the wise. So both life and mind will get filled with that quiescence. So your life will be conducted differently and your mind will always be in a stable state. Sthiti pragnasya, Krishna says in the Gita. And beautifully put now, adoration of the jnana wisdom that allowed this state to occur. So that's, here we come back to self-knowledge, is that you don't, Janaki hasn't depending on anyone in this. He's a realized soul already, and this realized soul has come upon a juncture in his life where he has to do this spiritual gut check. And it's like all of us should do in Maya, in life. Go to retreat, go inside of ourselves, spend a bunch of days under a tree in the woods, or whatever it's going to take. Isolate yourself and find the truth of the matter. So in that way, that's what I was saying earlier, Janaka did this whole process himself. He didn't need a guru, he didn't need teachings. It was all within him, and it had been with him all the while. Now it's just been veiled by some vestige of that curtain of nescience that's over everything. That's why it says here, in the Supreme Brahman, all the gods and the worlds and the beings that the gods preside over all dissolved. I saw it happen. Where? Inside of myself, because they're all inside myself, in this boundless ocean called the mind, the great mind. So that's a beautiful, and I could go on and on about that, adoration of the Jnana wisdom, or Atmagyan. It's a key teaching in Lord Vashishtha. Remember, this teaching is coming out of the story of King Janaka that Lord Vashishtha is talking to Sri Ram, right here in Yoga Vashishtha. This whole chart has been taken out of that story. Now we get to the serenades of Samadhi. Enough of improvisation, see, and enough theme and variations. Let's get right to the serenades of Samadhi that everyone loves. Cause the audience to stand up with full standing ovation. See, that's the best of India. First one is, what object is there in this world for me to accomplish? So he asks this question to his fully awakened mind now, as if to test it, or as if to affirm. What else is there now? Now that I've seen this again, I've reminded my mind of the great mind and of Brahman. What else could there be for me to accomplish? This is the ultimate accomplishment. I need nothing else now except this self-knowledge to effloresce in me and hold me up, sustain me all the time. I don't want to go anywhere but that peace of mind. And where did illusion go, he says. So what happened to illusion that was there in the curtain of nescience? See, the ignorance and all that. It's gone, utterly gone. To my present scrutiny, all is pure jnana. So before, you had to check it. It was objects, it was swirling particles, it was pleasure, it was appearances, it was whatever it was, but it was never Brahman. So now what I'm finding it is it's all knowledge, it's all my own wisdom, put into objects. My wisdom were the seeds for it. So now if I keep the process pure and clear of distraction and misdirection, then all of this can become Brahman, at least conditionally. And I can live amidst it as a manifested form of Brahman, or forms of Brahman. He goes on, I cognize nothing but the one immaculate Atmagyan. So he sees the self in all and all in the self. There is but one, the free knower, self, without a name, without a form or stain. In him is Maya dreaming all this dream. The witness, it appears as nature, soul, and I am that, and thou art that. Say Om Tat Sat Om. one of the great verses of Swami Vivekananda. There is but one, the free knower, self. He already talked about when he heard one of those sadhus in the garden saying, your knowledge, it's mere knowledge. Put it together with the knower, then it becomes something. Bring those together. So you don't think of knowledge as something external like we do here in the West. There's a knower behind it. And then there's an act of getting to know it. Bring these connections together and know you yourself as the source of it. Then you have higher mind. So then you cognize nothing but the one immaculate Atmagyan in everything. Then he says, I will not long for any object I do not come across naturally, and I will never evince aversion to any object that I duly come by. So that's going to be very good for him, because he has to come out of the locked door, resume his duties as a king, and a ruler of all these people and beings and family members, and a great example of somebody who drinks their milk from a brimming cup. He's got to do all of this again when he comes out after this spiritual gut check that showed him the truth again. It's like Holy Mother saying, they ask her, do you always remember Brahman at all times? And she said, no, how is that possible? There's this work to do. So she had to put her mind outward on people and things to help them, you see. So it's not going to be that effective, and probably not that possible to keep Brahman in mind when you're doing all these duties. It's an ideal some of us conjure up. Maybe some of us do it naively too. But she did say, but I know my Atmagyan. At any time I can take Brahman out from under my wearing cloth and look at it, just as easily as you would take a fruit from your cloth and put it in the palm of your hand. Hasta malaka, fruit in the palm of the hand. So, it's like they don't coexist, they separate. The world and God, Brahman and Maya. See, they seem to mix for about 45 seconds, and then they separate. So if you know that, you have discrimination, and therefore you know that Brahman and the world are two different things. How are they one then? That the world comes out of the mind. That's how they're one. And the mind dissolves into Brahman. So without these various bits of knowledge from the Dharma, you might go on for lifetimes thinking that God and Mammon mix perfectly. And you'll be a Janaka one day, and you'll have to prove to yourself otherwise. That only Brahman is real, the world is unreal, because it's a projection of the mind. And you've got billions of people involved in that projection, so it's very powerful. And that's why this chart has so many fives, whirlpools, eddies, currents. So he's speaking out of his own experience with Atmagyan in his possession, and he's now talking about objects themselves. I will not long for any object I do not come across naturally. I will never evince aversion to any object that I duly come by. Nicely put by this great soul. And I'm sure that he also is aware of this beautiful song from the tradition. Namajapane kyu chhod diya Rama naam, japane kyu chhod diya Rama. Namajapane kyu chhod diya Krodh na chora, Jyot na chora, Krodh na chora, Jyot na chora, Satvachane kyun chhod diya Rama, Satvachane kyun chhod diya Rama. tava channe kyun chor diya Rama naam japanne kyun chor diya Rama nama japanne kyun chor diya. Oh, tell me, O mind, Kailas sings, and Janaka echoed the sentiments millennia earlier. Why have you given up uttering the holy name of Ram? You should be renouncing your wealth, your anger, your deceit, and your dishonesty. Instead, you've given up your integrity and sacrificed your love of truth. You flatter the millionaire, yet forget to praise Sri Ram, though Ram is the owner of the entire universe. Your mind dwells constantly on sense objects and mundane habits, tempted by that which has no eternal existence. Is it for the sake of these fleeting things that you have forgotten the precious gem of Sri Ram's name? So, I will not long for any object or any wealth I do not come across naturally, and I will never again evince aversion to any object that I duly come by naturally. Shankara says much the same, and he wasn't a king, he was a monk. He said, just be satisfied by that which comes to you from your natural daily actions. And take what comes to you naturally. But it's this greed, it's this seeking for more, it's this storing up for the future, Sri Ramakrishna used to say, that causes people to get into all sorts of problems in Maya, in the realm of name and form, and time and space. Finishing up this chart and this class now, the last two, I will remain immutably fixed in my own self of Atmagyan. I know now what the self consists of. Self-knowledge, with a capital K, if you will, or non-dual wisdom. I'm going to stay there now. I'm never going to come down out of that high mountain top again. Finally, all events and happenings will occur as preordained by Dharma. Why? Because all errant thoughts get destroyed in the Dharma. So he keeps Atmagyan as his primary refuge and residence. At the same time, he holds on to the Dharma when he comes out of the doors and has to take up his daily duties as a king, as a monarch. And here you see his own statement at the bottom. Observing the actions of the world wherein men flutter like birds in the air and perish, and feeling no more significant than a speck of dust floating in a sea of dust, I gave up the ephemeral wealth and the objects of this world, and fixed my mind immutably in my own self of Atmagyan. This world wherein men flutter like birds in the air and perish, is, in the story it's that he sees the how to call them, birders. They're trying to trap birds, so they come with their nets. They'll throw the net over the whole tree. You see, and then this tree full of colored birds with plumage and everything, they're trying to trap and sell and use the feathers. So he sees this happen. He sees how all these birds most of them get caught in the net. Some flutter in the air frantically and try and fly away, but their mates and their children, their offspring, are also in the tree getting caught. So they get caught in midair and perish, you see, killed maybe, bows and arrows. So seeing this, and then making it a metaphor for what happens to souls in the world, how death comes with its net, casts over its waters and so forth. And he says, I gave up everything about having to do with that. It's all as insignificant as a dust of floating in a sea of dust. See? And fixed my mind immutably on my own nature of Atmagyan. So this has been a whole class on King Janaka's Song of Victory. And it's 4 movements, you might say, like a symphony has 4 movements. So he had his melodies of morning, we had his improvisational airs, then we had his variations on the theme, finally we had his beautiful, mature composition, his serenades on Samadhi. So I hope this has all been helpful with you, particularly in connection with the Curtain of Nations teaching, which you can look back on, the Tree of Samsara, and the Mighty River of Brahman. Next week we will go on, because this has been a good introduction to suffering and striving both. You can see, next week we'll start concentrating more on the striving part of it, to show ways out of some of these predicaments, because King Janaka has led the way for us. So here, let's end with a chant. Om Bhadram Karnibhihi Srinayama Devaha Bhadran Pasyema Akshabir Yajatraha Stirai Rangaish Tushtuvam Sastanuvir Vyashema Devahitam Yadayahu Swasti na Indra Vrida Shravaha Swasti na Pusha Vishwadevaha Swasti na Starksho Arishtanemihi Swasti no Brihaspatir Dadatu Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. May we see with these eyes what is good and spiritual. May we hear with these ears what is noble and uplifting. And may we, while worshipping the Lord and Mother of the universe, with healthy minds and bodies, live a life which is beneficial to ourselves and to all other beings. Om, peace, peace, peace. May peace be unto us, may peace be unto all. Om Hari